crowd today. It's kind of exciting. To our 4 o'clock work session, I'll let Sarah say a few more things and kick it off for us.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. This is a work session on the agrivoltaics section of the text amendment that we are reviewing related to solar. We've got quite a number of folks here to present this item. Before I turn it over to Mary to start the introductions, I just want to remind everybody that these work sessions are for informational purposes only and no decisions are made at this work session today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mary. You have to turn on the button. Yeah, so when you guys come through.
I'm Mary Miller, a city county planner working on the text amendment.
I'm Amber Lehrman with the Agrarian Future Alliance.
I'm Jacqueline Smith, and I'm with Central Grazing Company.
I'm Karen Willey, a planning commissioner and ad hoc solar committee member, and also a regenerative farmer in Douglas County.
Hi, I'm Tyler Lindquist, Chair of the Douglas County Food Policy Council.
Do I push it? No. Kim Kreiner Ritchie, Interim Sustainability Director.
Tanya Voigt, Zoning Director.
Okay, for anybody who's watching us online, Mary Miller is going to kick us off. And if you do not have a smartphone, tablet, or computer screen, there will be a recording available later and the materials are on our website.
I'm Mary Miller, city county planner, and we were here on March 2nd to discuss the standards in general. And at that time, the commission asked us to prepare a list of standards so we could clearly identify which ones are eligible for modifications. And then we're also here to discuss the agrivoltaic component of the standards a little more. That's right. Next one. And so in your packet, there is a table of all the standards and the ones that are eligible for modification. There's 4 of them. Those were noted. The first standard that's eligible for modification is the grading limitation. Grading is limited on prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance so that no more than 5% of the total site area may be graded. And site area in this case means the area which is covered by solar panels. Now that can be modified by the county commission to allow additional grading if necessary to ensure proper drainage or to mitigate unusual site constraints. Another standard that can be modified is the height limitation. Solar panels could be no taller than 15 feet, but that can also be modified by the county commission to accommodate slopes without grading or to accommodate agrivoltaic uses, provided the height doesn't negatively impact nearby land uses or the character of the area. So these modifications and the criteria for granting them are included in the standards. And the process for a modification is it would be submitted with the application. Staff would review it, take it to the planning commission. Planning commission would provide a recommendation on the modification along with this conditional use permit application to the county commission. The size limit of the commercial utility size scaled facilities is limited to 1,000 acres. And again, that's the area that's under the solar panels. This can be modified based on site-specific characteristics, which are determined to aid in the preservation of rural character or natural features, or to promote the shared agricultural use of the property. And the final one was electrical connections and distribution lines need to be underground. This can also be modified based on environmental sensitive lands or other features that would make underground connections detrimental. We have other items that can be changed but not modified by the county commission. Setbacks can be waived by the adjacent property owners, And we are talking only the side and rear setbacks. And if an adjacent property owner waives, an affidavit would be filed with their property, with their deed. So any future owners would be aware that the setbacks have been waived. And the 25-foot landscape buffer area next to residential properties or the residential portion of a property can also be waived by the adjacent property owner with an affidavit. And so at the end of this, I was going to go over next steps, but I thought I'd mention them now because there's a lot of presentation and just in case I don't get a chance to get back. The next steps that are possible are you could forward the amendment on to one of your regular agendas for discussion and public comment, or you could return it to staff now with direction to do further research into agrivoltaics and provide revised standards with additional regulations or incentives. In either case, when it does come before you at a regular meeting, you have a lot of voting options. You can approve the amendment as it's written. You can approve it with revisions that you make at the meeting. You can return it to staff with direction for more research and revised language. You can return it to the Planning Commission with direction for more research and revised language, or of course, you can deny the amendment. And so I'm just briefly going to show these. I'm not going to go through them because there's a lot to get through today, but these are the standards. They're listed in your packet of where we actually address agrivoltaics. Primarily, agrivoltaics are encouraged. You require an agrivoltaic plan to show where they will be. And if they're not going to be on the site, then that needs to be stated in the plan. So that's kind of the current situation of agrivoltaics in our standards. And I will, Kim, I think you're following me, right? I'll just find out how to get this off. Sorry. I don't have it.
Let me scroll down. Oh, you're on the desktop. Oh. There you go. There you go. Now you can share. Now you have to go back to the Zoom. And you are, yep. You want that? Oh.
Sorry, everyone. Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Kim Kreiner Ritchie, Interim Sustainability Director. I'm grateful to be able to talk to you from our Sustainability Office about this item today. I'm going to speak with you briefly about how the topic of agrivoltaics or co-locating solar utility projects with agricultural production intersects with a number of our established community goals and values. And then we'll hear from both local and national experts in the field. Staff and partners had hoped to show you a couple videos today of agrivoltaics happening on the ground with experts in the country, but we don't have video available to us, so I apologize for that. Poor preparation, but we do have Byron Komanek with us, who is going to share with you from Jack Solar Farm later in our expert panel, as well as a board member from the American Solar Grazing Association who is on our Zoom today and is available to answer questions, though he's not on the panel. That board member, his name is Daniel Finnegan, and he's also the owner of Solar Shepherd, which is a solar grazing management company. So any questions on that topic, he would be able to weigh in as well. So in the briefest ways possible, I want to highlight how leaving the door open for agriculture as part of the vast land use of solar utility is in keeping with our established community values in Douglas County. The food system plan with commissioners. By now, you've heard quoted to you several times by myself and members of the Food Policy Council, has its first two multi-objective goal areas dedicated to sustaining a thriving economy for agriculture producers, food entrepreneurs, and workers, and to prioritize natural resource conservation with a focus on maintaining the foundation of our food system, healthy soil and water. Plan 2040 echoes this. It also asserts the value that agriculture has for our community identity and economy, and calls for both a climate action plan and an open space plan. The values of renewable energy, resilience, preservation, and food production will certainly all emerge in these conversations, efforts that our staff and partners are actively moving forward, both in the community input and analysis phases. These regulations come along at a very fortuitous time when we can create space to advance in all these regards and not preclude one for the other. The Food Policy Council, in partnership with K-State Extension in 2020 and 2021, set about gathering community feedback about aspirations and values around agricultural economic development for Douglas County, which will very soon be turned into a report to deliver to you, commissioners. When asked the question, what is necessary for agriculture to thrive in Douglas County, opportunity, training, land access, and valuing agriculture as economically important were all seen as necessary for success. When I conclude, you will hear from Agrarian Future Alliance, who will share their mission to fill some of these needs through agrivoltaics. On March 21, staff had a very insightful meeting with experts from Savion and Nextera. Experts shared genuinely their interest and hesitations with agrivoltaics. The overarching theme of our conversation was that they are working on it because this is the future and what they need, and that they need the flexibility to be able to propose agricultural solutions that were right for the site and the project. The Planning Commission, I know, was intentional in not prescribing what an agrivoltaic project must be, which leaves room for this flexibility. The systems that serve us best are functionally diverse and resilient. Functionally diverse meaning we are not limited to a narrow function, however valuable that function might be. By enabling a future that co-locates solar utility and agriculture production, we are setting up our community to be more resilient in the face of ever-shrinking resources. Commissioner Kelly, you asked a question at our last work session. How do we adapt to future conditions? We know from the past 2 years and the way that climate change has surpassed almost every prediction that the future is going to surprise us. We can best adapt to disturbances that are sure to come by allowing ourselves flexibility to adapt to changing conditions and encouraging systems that are open to innovation and opportunity. I would like to introduce our first expert panelist, Amber Lehrman, Executive Director of Agrarian Future Alliance.
So yes, I am Amber Lehrman with the Agrarian Future Alliance. We're a new organization. Not what I call. I should swallow the mic. This is the idea. Okay, got it. So I thought it would behoove us to briefly talk about who we are. So our tagline is revitalizing people and power for the next food system. What that means is our organization works on training new farmers. We work on empowering existing farmers to expand their business. And the way we plan to do that is a connection to land through agrivoltaic partnerships. And we'll talk about, this is a very short presentation, about why that is important and why it works. So first, just quickly, and you guys are probably already very well aware of these facts, but farming in the US has a tremendous diversity problem. We have an issue with education and training, which was highlighted by Kim in the survey of people trying to do this here. We also see it in the lack of diversity in our graduating classes from our agricultural training institutions. So we are training people to be large-scale farmers, and then they need to be small-scale farmers, right? So we have a gap. We have tremendous barriers to land access, and I think that came through in 3 of Kim's points from the survey. So right now, 97% of our farm owners are white. Most of them are planning to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. That's creating a land grab, but not for everybody. So 90% of that land is changing hands through inheritance and trust, not on the open market, which means if your family doesn't already own land, you don't either. When we say, you know, land prices have risen 47%, that is the statistic for Kansas and across the Midwest. In this region, it's closer to 300% in 10 years. So it's pretty easy to see how farmers are getting priced out of being able to have access to land to create a business at all or to grow an existing business. And this is really where we come into the opportunity for agrivoltaics. So if we look at the planned area of solar expansion over the next few decades, it is 4 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. Like that's kind of hit home. I'm like, Yellowstone's real big, right? And 4 times that's real big. Like you see statistics of however many thousands of acres and it feels very ambiguous, but like that's a lot. And so if we looked at the number of farmers that could create a business under those panels, like it is enormous, absolutely enormous. And then if we look at the cascading impacts of that, right? And I think Jacqueline's going to speak more to what is the larger economic impact of creating that opportunity for our communities, right? It has a huge cascading thing far beyond the individual farmer. And so that's really why we feel like this is a key thing. Within agrivoltaics, obviously, there are a lot of different options. And you're going to hear directly about grazing today. You'll be able to hear directly about one example of vegetable growing. There's also an opportunity for herbs and flowers and all kinds of products that can be grown in what is essentially a dappled shade environment. It is really far more diverse for what is possible than what I think most people picture. I think we picture land under panels as dead ground, and that's just not how it actually is. Especially when you have pivoting panels that are following the sun. And so I think it's important to realize the diversity that is possible with this opportunity. And then to take kind of a broader view, so you're going to hear from Jack's Garden today, you're going to hear or have the opportunity to hear from the American Solar Grazing Association and from a grazing expert here locally. Globally, Israel has just announced $6 million of investment into 6 trial sites because they recognize that in order to both survive on renewable energy and feed their population, they have to make agrivoltaics work. There is a project going on in Maine that is researching blueberry production under solar panels, which is kind of exciting. I'm like, I like blueberries. That sounds good. And then there's a $10 million research project going on between Colorado State and Illinois State that Kansas may be able to get involved in to research biological diversity underneath solar panels and how those things interact. And then there are currently calls for grants that would tap into this that, yeah, if you look through them, it's a little bit dizzying how many people are wanting to throw money at figuring out how to do agrivoltaics. So that's really what I had to say. So I think I'm handing it off to Jacqueline.
Excuse me. All right, well, thank you. I just want to really kind of start out saying that I am so extremely excited about this conversation. And I get the opportunity to speak about my work here today, which is not very often the case because usually I'm in the field taking care of lambs, but now I get to be here at this table telling you about my work. And the thing that I'm really excited to talk about is the strong recommendations for the agrivoltaic plan in the vegetation and agrivoltaics plan, because as you're going to receive applications from solar and wind companies to put up these solar farms in Douglas County, one thing to really pay attention to as they are developing the agrivoltaics plan is what type of grazing system. So right now, it's known that grazing and beekeeping are the 2 commodities that can co-locate with solar grazing at this moment. But we also know that we want to advance the technologies as they come available and work with partners in the solar and wind company who demonstrate real true commitment to our agricultural values by adapting early to the agrivoltaics movement. And as Central Grazing Company has developed over the years, I've been an agricultural entrepreneur for 25 years. Actually, I am not from a farming background, so this is all like a new industry for me. And I'm in the middle tier industry. So that means that I'm too big for farmers markets, but too large to be a global corporate farmer. So one of the things that I focus on a lot in my work is making sure that the way that we farm pays really close attention to the people who work the land, the animals we care for, and the planet. And one way we do that is by creating grazing systems that actually grow soil fertility, regenerates the soil. There are a couple of different ways that you can actually have a grazing system, especially with agrovoltaics. One is a selective grazing system where the sheep are out on the field. They get managed on some sort, but they're not systematically rotated, or a regenerative system, which is the way that I farm. And that is mimicking how prairie ecosystems evolved over time by putting some animal body weight on the soil and moving them fast. So you can imagine like great bison roaming the Great Plains. Well, I'm trying to mimic that with sheep. So what we do is we move them very fast. Usually our goal is around 24 grazing hours, and we don't return to that area for 90 days. As you can imagine, that requires a lot of land use for any kind of scalability. I built my business to aggregate externally from farmers in Kansas, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Missouri, and we have the opportunity to scale an internal supply chain with this opportunity with agrovoltaics. You know, as I said, 25 years I've been in this business, and I have been able to, I have been privileged enough to be able to accumulate 80 acres of land, which is hard to come by, but not enough to grow a scaling business. And land access, infrastructure access, and access to market have always been the bottlenecks for my business to grow and other businesses to come here too. And one of the bottlenecks here, as we're talking about, is this land access. So as we start to allow land access through an agrovoltaic system that is professionally managed, excuse me, with recommendations from the NRCS and other regenerative sources, what will happen is there will be frontline food innovators that will be attracted to this area and will work towards of creating entrepreneurships that support technologies from software to breeds to infrastructure like harvesting plants, grain mills, internal fulfillment systems, logistics, admin, all the things that go into building a complete industry. And that's just for a sheep grazing industry. And the more that this advances over the next 20, 25 years, we will have opportunity for new and exciting innovation to happen that will really create a resilient food system. As we've seen through COVID, you know, our food system has really been critically disrupted because of the lack of infrastructure that small farmers have access to. But this agrovoltaic system will build those infrastructures that are needed to advance technologies in the agricultural field that I haven't seen in 25 years. And then the way that we can see this working is that the initial agrivoltaic system attracts capital investments into agrivoltaics, which will then be used to advance and elevate small to medium-sized regenerative shepherds in the area, teaching them how to graze in partnerships with solar and wind companies. Then those agrovoltaics will farmers will have access to land where they can start building a business. They will have access to market and infrastructure so they can diversify their portfolios, and they will attract new farmers. And all of this will create a flywheel of return on the investment that will be captured time and time again, because we're really focusing on a non-consolidated supply chain that is regionally based and resilient in times of drought and also times of disruption of the economies. So the last thing that I want to go back to talking really quickly about is about the two different types of grazing structures that you can graze in. And as you're looking at the applications as they come in, is the selective grazing or is the regenerative grazing? And I want to just clarify that when we're looking at a professionally grazed grazed management system. We're going to be looking at the farmers, the producers, the stewards who are going to be in that system are going to be looking at how to move those sheep in a very quick way so that we can grow really long root systems that will tap into groundwater in times of drought. And it will also stabilize the soil bed and will create a natural photosynthesis resilience that will capture more carbon and put it back into the soil, which builds the soil fertility over time. And that's what we're really going to look at. And when we start employing those kinds of practices in farming, what we find is we have a natural bio, the whole ecology of the area advances and elevates, and we find impacts on all level, from new species that are in the seed beds to wildlife being able to kind of regenerate into those systems as well. And that's what a regenerative system can support. And so as you're thinking about these regulations, we're really excited to be part of the conversations, and we really hope that you will strongly recommend an agrivoltaics plan. But I also want to be very frank that we aren't ready for a full acceptance of the agrivoltaic structure within an operation, because there's a lot that we have to build. But the really encouraging thing that's really unique to Douglas County is that every single person on this panel is sitting here saying, yes, we want to build it. We want to have this opportunity to build it. We want to encourage agrivoltaics in a very big way so that we can partner with the right solar and wind companies who also have that aligned value. Because if they're all here listening to this conversation, the truth of it is that this is a very unique position that we have here in Douglas County to provide this type of advancements in the agrivoltaic. We have to start where we are and we have to build it. And so I'm very encouraged by all of these conversations. And thank you again for having me.
Yes, so Byron has been moved into the panel. I think Kim's going to stop to share so that, here we go. Go ahead. Yeah, you can unmute and. go
All
ahead.
right, should I share my screen then?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Understood. Hi, folks. I'm Byron Komanek, owner of Jack Solar Garden. Does that come up just fine?
Yes.
Excellent. Owner of Jack Solar Garden, also the executive director of our Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center here on site. And I was heartened to hear from previous speakers about the idea of needing to be able to be prepared for the future as climate change keeps changing how we can interact with our land. And I would like to show you through this presentation how we have adjusted our solar array so that we can adapt to different types of functions throughout our 4 acres of solar panels over the coming years, mainly in elevating our panels up higher. By putting them up higher, you allow for a lot more access, people to walk underneath the panels, potentially cattle if you put them up high enough. All sorts of different activities can be done if you have the space to do it. And solar arrays are just space. It all kind of depends back on how you design that space and how you construct that space up front for how it can be used over the next 20 to 40 years of its lifespan. I always like to show the picture of my grandpa, Jack. He's the one that owned our land back in '72 and made it possible for me to be out here on our land to do something with it these days. So that's where Jack Solar Garden comes from. Over the past 50 years, we've mainly had hay production that you can see on the left-hand side. And when I moved out here in 2016, we have 24 acres in Boulder County, Colorado, trying to figure out what else we could do on our land, and came across a variety of other agricultural activities, but none of them were going to be sufficient in a short term to be able to help us pay the bills back. Whereas we came across the idea of solar and started working with Boulder County to figure out what that would be like. And at the beginning, Boulder County wouldn't allow for solar on farmland. They only allowed for up to 100 kilowatts to be able to be of use to the farm and its operations. Whereas we argued, just like hay is a commodity, we sell it into the community. It's not just for our own use. Electricity is a commodity that we can sell from our farm back into the community. Like, let us go down this path. Let us have a larger system than 100 kilowatts. And anyhow, you all don't really care about the technology, do you? You care about conserving the land. So focus on that. And they did. So they restricted us to no more than 7 acres of solar array infrastructure on our property. which enabled us to build Jack Solar Garden. So if you came out to our family's farm this summer to see what it was, you might see our that sign in the silo as you come in. And this pasture to the north of our barn is where we built Jack Solar Garden. A 1.2 megawatt community solar garden supplies enough power for about 300 homes in the area. 4 acres of land, 3,276 solar panels, elevated at heights where the torque tube is at either 6 feet or 8 feet. So we could learn about the different microclimates underneath our solar panels. These panels are single axis tracking, meaning they simply follow the sun from east to west over the course of the day. We use our space in a lot of different ways, from having events that you can see here in the middle, where folks are hanging out underneath our solar panels, to growing crops that you can see in the top right picture in the bottom middle. We have an Artists on the Farm program where we bring out artists to help showcase what we're doing on our land to our local community, so folks will be more interested in it. And we have tours on our land. On the far left-hand side, you can see a bunch of scribbles on that steel post where folks leave their name on our solar array as they walk around it during our tours. We had about 1,000 people come out last season. We work with researchers from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado State University, and University of Arizona to learn more about our microclimates. They collect biomass to learn more about where hay grows best within the solar array. They look at soil moisture, temperature, humidity, soil heat flux, light intensity within the solar array, so we can better learn what types of vegetation will do best within our system. I think the sexy part about what we do has been the growing of vegetables. I think that's what everybody wants to see. We have tomatillos there in the middle, carrots, tomatoes, and beans. We grow crops out here in collaboration with a nonprofit called Sprout City Farms that allows young farmers the opportunity to come out on our land and learn how to grow crops within our agrivoltaic system. In coming years, they'll be inviting more farmers to come out and learn about this. We grew about 8,000 pounds of food underneath an acre of land in just half a season, because it took some time to put our irrigation system up in place. I should note that we built our solar array at the end of 2020, and 2021 was our first growing season. We're about heading into planting season coming up soon. We also set up a large pollinator habitat around the perimeter of our solar array. It's over 3,000 perennials, elderberries, blackberries, apple trees, gooseberries, all sorts of things out there, just to provide opportunity for local pollinators to create a habitat, and they can help us out with providing for pest control or pollination as well. And this was with work with Audubon Rockies. As I mentioned, we've hosted a variety of events over the past some months, or past year plus, I should say. We've had different politicians come out. Even Governor Jared Polis came out and signed legislation here in Colorado pertaining to giving some state funds towards researching agrivoltaics. We promote artists. We've had a dancer on the farm. We've had a mixed assemblage artist come out to repurpose things, and we've had musicians come out. Again, it's just space. And the higher up you put those panels, the more space, the more access you have to do something interesting with that space. And this helps us to create community, allows opportunities for people to come out to our farm, see what it's like of working within a solar array, learning more about solar electricity, learning about gardening, farming, pollinators, all the rest of it. And through our nonprofit, the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, we've been bringing out over 150 high school students past year. We're hoping to more than double that this coming year, so that they get an understanding that we don't have to stovepipe ideas. It doesn't have to be agriculture here, solar over there. We can do the two together, and we can do even more than just those two things together. A lot of folks talk about dual use and agrivoltaics being synonymous, and I mean, it should be multi-use, not just dual use. And in the end, our nonprofit focuses on the tours, on opportunities for community members to come out, and focusing on this coming season of working with more policymakers out here in the West to learn more about what they could be doing and changing within their own regulations to either promote agrivoltaics or to, I guess, more restrict poor practices within the solar industry that might denude soils, compact it down, and the like. So that was a quick presentation on my side.
Thank you, Byron. I'm Karen Willie, and I wear several hats within the food system, but the one to highlight here is about land access, and that is that I have farmtender.us. It is an online tool that's rolling out this summer to help connect regenerative farmers with regenerative landowners. It was not designed specifically for solar or agrivoltaics, but it certainly is a tool available for companies that would choose to use it for that. It's a way to seamlessly identify and vet farmers that could play the role that you're hoping that they will play. For us, it's a way to increase eco-farming, ecological farming practices on the land. It'll roll out being Kansas-centric, but available nationwide, and to increase land access for new and underrepresented farmers. So that's another piece of the puzzle. I just want to lift up the rest of the panel. We bring a lot of the pieces to the table. We've got availability for training, connection, marketing, products that could be potentially raised in an agrivoltaic system. So the main point that I'd like to make is that though this is a fairly new use, it is not unusual and that it shouldn't be frightening. There are a lot of potentials to roll into this, and we in Douglas County are uniquely poised to take advantage of it. For the solar companies, I know that there are some fears, and I know that they have come here also to speak about that if we have time to ask for this session. For me, the difference is between a primary use and an accessory use. We talk about that in planning a lot. The primary use for their activity would be solar electrical generation, and we recognize that, and that the agricultural uses would then be designed to fit around that. So there's no need to sacrifice production or even to sacrifice profits off of that. When we saw Jack Solar Farm, when Byron spoke, that is a primary use of agriculture, and the solar is a unique and accessory use that is brought into that system. So some things that we see there, we might see in our agrivoltaic systems if we were to have that for utility scale solar in Douglas County, and some might not. There's a lot of research opportunities and a lot of money for research opportunities. So those things will unfold, but I think we have a lot of opportunities here. One of the things that I've been clear that we put in the regulations from the Solar Ad Hoc Group and then the Planning Commission is that there is not a requirement for agrivoltaic uses in these regulations. And the reason for that is that though we have a robust ecosystem, should I say, of entrepreneurs who will move into this system, on the grounds boots right now, we don't have a lot of acres that we could fulfill. So I didn't want us to be in a situation we were talking about what we didn't have. I want us to be talking about what is possible. We can step into this space pretty seamlessly, more so than other places could. My hope is that companies will choose to step up and bring this as their good story. We need them to be creative, be partners, be good neighbors, and this is one way that they can show that. So the difference between if we were asking for a rezoning, where we would write those rules and the only public process would be yes or no on the rezoning, and we would just follow the rules. This is a conditional use permit. So each project has a very robust public process where you are the gatekeeper. You as the county commission will decide what projects move forward and what do not. So we tried to be as clear and give guidance for what we in our research felt was important, but also leave some flexibility for that. So each project will come forward and have to bring its own story and how it fits into the neighborhood and to Douglas County values. Bringing agrivoltaics is a very strong way for companies to show that they are a good fit for Douglas County. And so we are showing in this presentation what resources we offer as a community. So I feel like I'm just here to answer questions beyond that. And you've heard from a really great panel of presenters.
Mary Miller, planner. I basically am at the end of this for when you want to decide to move ahead to let us know what the next steps would be. And I don't have my PowerPoint up anymore, I don't think. No, but basically, on that, and it's in your packet, I listed what standards we currently have. We do encourage agrivoltaics, and we don't require them just because there's such a variety of things that could happen, different types of agrivoltaics. A solar facility, the way it's designed now, would be suitable for sheep or for bees, as they mentioned, without any modifications. However, we would like to encourage a range of uses. So in the agrivoltaic management plan, we'd like them to maybe provide additional information and a variety of uses. And it may be incentives are needed, that may be the way to move this forward rather than regulations. But that's the close of our presentation. And then we're happy to take questions. And then at the end, as I mentioned, my main goal of being at the end is just to get your direction for how you'd like to move forward.
Commissioners, we had a question in the chat, and Byron, I'll just ask you to go to unmute and clarify what you want to clarify. Not everyone can see the chat, so I'll just have you put that on the record.
Thank you. There was a previous statement saying Jack Solar Garden was not being built or designed for electricity production. It was more for the agriculture, and that is absolutely incorrect. We are first and foremost an energy producing site. Our business is electricity. We happen to allow for agriculture and secondary uses, and we do not provide, we do not even charge our agricultural or researchers any leases for this. We make all of our money off of the electricity being sold, and our ability to pay for the construction and continuing operation of our solar array is solely on the electricity side.
Thank you, Byron.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I really appreciate all of this. This has been very educational and very helpful. I did just want to clarify, Mary, at the very end, we are not making any decisions today, right? So this is just our chance to have a conversation about potential next steps.
Correct. Right. We wouldn't make a decision, but just to let us know if you'd like us to. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. We would be asking you to make a decision, but at the end, let us know if you want us to work on agrivoltaics further, or if you would decide to move it ahead. Kind of your next steps, but not a decision on the standards.
So Mary, this is Commissioner Kelly. In the plan, I'm looking on slide 22, I think it says a vegetation management and agrivoltaic plan. I also heard you refer to it as the agrivoltaic. Is this two different plans or one plan? That's my question.
It's basically one plan with two
Okay.
components, because your vegetation management, if you do agrivoltaics, that would be your vegetation management, except you may decide something different for the buffer area. So it's combined. It would be one plan.
Okay, so if someone was not doing agrivoltaics, they still need to do the vegetation management plan, right?
Right. We definitely don't want to have just eroded dirt or gravel. So there has to be vegetation. And so in the standards, we either require you to do agriculture or to plant a diverse array of native plants. So we do have rules if you're not doing agrivoltaics. We do, because we want to maintain the health of the soil at the minimum.
This is Commissioner Reed. That's my question too, Commissioner Kelly. And to further clarify, it sounds like you're differentiating between the vegetation management for under the arrays and the vegetation management of the buffer zone, meaning they could be different. Is that specified? Will that be specified in the application?
Yes, we require a landscape plan, and that's for that landscape buffer yard, because that's where we're going to say we want trees, and they have to tell us how many trees and how many bushes or whatever we need to buffer the nearby residents. And with a CUP, usually that resident is involved, and we can make a decision how would they get the buffering that they want or they need. But as far as the vegetation and agrivoltaics, that would be throughout the entire site area. So those are two very separate plans.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering from staff, Mary and Tanya, maybe, and Kim, I think you mentioned even some conversations that have been had with companies, with solar companies. And I'm interested to better understand what their feedback has been about their interest and their, I guess, any history of doing agrivoltaics, or incorporate. My understanding is that there isn't necessarily any regulations that require it on a county level through the staff research at this point, but curious if you learned anything about previous use or planning of such projects with any of the companies.
Yeah, we met with Savion and Nextera just to discuss what we were considering and get their feedback. And Savion was very interested. They actually have a farmer who's on their staff and is one of their engineers. And they're doing research to see how they can incorporate it. They see agrivoltaics as an important part of the future. And Nextera also discussed that they're open to the idea and they're very enthusiastic. They don't have something online right now. They did raise some concerns about the legality, how the leases would have to be written, because if the landowner wants to allow other people on the farm, or would they have to do the farming themselves? So there's a lot of logistics that have to be worked out before you can add this new use. But they seemed open to it, I thought, during our meetings.
Maybe I'll just sort of add to that. I do think we have someone here from one of those industries, and I really appreciate the Planning Commission involving the different stakeholders in that. Sorry, I don't know your name. Mr. Anderson, I think I've met you once before. But maybe Jacqueline, you could start with, I'm interested to understand what relationships have happened, what that's like between those doing the agriculture and the solar entity. And Mr. Anderson, if it's okay with other commissioners, I'd love to invite you up and share with us sort of your perspective from a solar provider as well. Is my question making sense for both of you? I want to make sure I'm clear.
Again, would be really discussed in, development of the program, but the way that I have been talking about it with other colleagues and with some companies is that it works on, there's a couple of ways to manage the vegetation, right? It's either chemicals, mowing, or it's grazing. And so the relationship would be held between the grazing system or the grazer and the energy company, where they would be hired out to perform that management system. So instead of hiring mowers or graveling it, we would use sheep that would move in and rotate throughout and keep the vegetation in a low growth state and build soil fertility. And that low growth state will allow the solar panels to work at the highest efficiencies. It will allow the sheep will allow the grasses to not grow above the solar panels so that it can capture the most sunlight that they have. And so the relationship is between the solar company and the grazer itself. And so, Mr. Anderson, do you?
Yeah, so again, Alan Anderson, I do represent Extra Energy Resources. I am also a Douglas County resident, so it's good to be here. I think one of the key takeaways is that we're trying to all figure how this could work at a larger scale. What you'll see and what is alluring to all of us are the smaller scale projects where it is really interesting. Solar gardens in Colorado are a completely different system and legal framework for doing those versus a utility scale project that's competitive on the marketplace. So, we've talked with Central Grazing and Nexter is one of the leaders, has members on the Solar Grazing Association, and looking into how can we further this. And that's the key part. Is I think the industry is probably one of the best at being at the forefront of making different changes, but we have to recognize we're not there. I mean, the infrastructure isn't there as we sit here today for the regulations to make them requirements. And I think we have to be realistic about that. How can we get there? And I think that's where in a place like, Douglas County, we have opportunity probably of creating the research and the infrastructure there to then make it possibly realistic. So I think our opportunity is probably on investigating how this can then be deployed in a bigger way than necessarily saying because it doesn't exist. It can't be done at a utility scale way at this moment. But then what it'd be is working with grazers that do it in the right way so that it has, regenerative qualities, all the things, but it's getting that to work and not forgetting that we're working with an electrical system that's delivering energy to the grid. And it is different than a solar garden in Colorado under their structure, and it's different than other things. We, kind of have to recognize that. We'd also have to go through all those, legal challenges of going through and just saying, okay, we're going to go on someone else's property. We lease it for the rights to do solar energy. We don't lease it to put up commercial enterprises of any other kind. And so we would have to go back and also go through all those hurdles to make sure that it's allowed, be respectful to people, all that kind of thing. And we have to be really careful. We are guests on someone else's land when we do a project, and we have to be very respectful when we do that too.
Yeah, that's helpful to me, and just trying to understand how that would work. You talk about large scale. Is there any capacity within the industry? So like maybe it's a large scale project, but it's a small scale agrivoltaic project on that site. Am I making sense? So maybe, Byron talked about 7 acres. Some of the maximum size here is 1,000 acres, just for the community to get the scale that we're talking about. Is there any capacity for industry to say, look, we think we can do 20 acres of agrivoltaics, while the other, this just sounds crazy to say, 1,920 acres, or whatever that is, my math may be wrong, but whatever the balance is not dedicated to that. Is that a possibility?
Well, I see, to even get to the 20 acres, we have to make sure it works. And again, respecting, we have a live electrical system. We have to respect the livestock, make sure that if they're deployed even on 20 acres, that it works and it can be done. We have to make sure that all those things could be in place. But that's where I think things are headed, is that we need to make sure it works, period. And it's important to respect all those, even on a smaller scale. So I do think, and that's what you're seeing as pilot projects. And of course, next year is part of those too, is trying to do it on a pilot scale and see if we can make that work. Then we can deploy that on a larger scale. So I think there'll be kind of a couple, if you look at what really gets us to work, we all want it to work, but we have to actually do the hard work to get there. So I think the first would be, it really is the research around that. Then it is continued pilot projects around that to then deploy it in a large scale. And so some of those things I've kind of expressed, Douglas County could be a leader in this. Douglas County has grasses and different things in different areas that they could actually start that infrastructure and put it in place and help be part of that solution too. But I think, as you're alluding to, that's exactly right. We have to kind of do the hard work of getting to the end place, as opposed to wanting to get straight to the end of the game. And that's where we are. And I think the industry is going to be a good partner in trying to get there.
Thanks.
I have a bit of a follow-up question to what Commissioner Kelly asked. I really appreciate the way that you all have framed this conversation around values. So we have the values of sustainability and how we think about that. We have the values of agriculture, and what our Planning Commission has really valued is around protecting agricultural land in our community. We also have questions around what folks are doing with their property. And I think that you've brought up, Mr. Anderson, some good points about your leasing land from property owners throughout the community. And so I'm wondering, from kind of a regulatory perspective, but also thinking about how do we prioritize all of those pieces? Because what I heard I thought the Jack's solar garden conversation was really interesting. The primary business is solar. Some of these other aspects, when we hear about grazing, that's kind of management for the land. It's also a separate business, but now we're talking about 2 businesses on private land. So there's a lease for the solar, and then also a business arrangement between grazers and the solar industry. So we're hitting all of those values, but we're doing it in a really complex way. What are the best ways for us to prioritize those competing values, and for us to think through this from a priority perspective?
Yeah, I fully hear that too. And I think from what Mr. Anderson is saying is that the research for other commodities under solar panels besides bees and sheep do not exist. So we need to be able to find the researchers, the projects who want to support that, the land, so we can do pilot programs of different types of crops. I think it makes solar energy companies feel really uncomfortable to have farmers driving tractors around their solar arrays. I've heard that before, right? And I know Jack's Garden, well, I don't know that, but I do know that some of those other places are doing hand dug vegetables, which makes it very small scale. But when we're talking about grazing, which is the capability that we do have on 1,000 acres, land that is being transitioned from my experience over the last 25 years, can hold about 1.8 sheep pairs, that's a ewe and a lamb, per acre. And so you have the ability to use lots of animals through that system. And when you have a brand that is being developed to scale past that, like Central Grazing Company wants to be around, 10, 20,000 over the next 10 years. We want to be producing quite a lot of sheep. We have the capability of running a grazing management system through large scale utilities as we build it in a progressive way. So like we start out with small phases where there'll be a number of acres, and then through a agrivoltaics management plan that we will develop with the solar energy companies, and we will plot out how much more acres and a timeline when we can start managing the entire project. That would be the ideal process forward. And then as we work out some of the other issues with doing pilot programs with vegetables or other kinds of grazing animals on a small scale, we can incorporate those technology advancements as agrivoltaics become a greater industry.
That's really helpful. I really appreciate that. Like, we are just in the learning stages of all of this. I have a bit of a more complicated tax question then, because we're leasing land from private landowners that is agricultural land. We're putting industrial solar on it. So now we have agricultural land with an industrial use, but then we're also adding a business of grazing that is another business use. How should that land be taxed?
Commissioner Portillo, that's an excellent question. It's something that probably we could talk about at a different work session where we have the conversation about the text amendment as a whole. And I'd like to have the appraiser engaged in that conversation as well. It's complex. That's the short answer, but I think we could talk through it at the review of the amendment, if that's all right.
And I would, I think the point you make is a great one we can't lose sight of. Sometimes when you think about what this is, and it's different than the solar garden in Colorado that can do that without the utility participation. This is a competitive project that's trying to deliver electricity to the grid that has to be selected. So there's a couple things. I think, in Douglas County, we have talked a lot about climate change mitigation. To do climate change mitigation, we have to do a lot of renewable energy in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The more things we layer upon without understanding the impact, but the more things we layer on to a renewable project and it makes it go away, where it's both a climate change problem and it also just ends up killing the project by accident. And so we do have to be really cautious on understanding the impacts of each regulation and what it actually does, even if it's on our wish list. And so I think in the Planning Commission stage, Dr. Dan Lehrman from University of Kansas submitted a phenomenal paper on climate change and how, and that impact on climate change. And then if we really care about soils, that's should be the number one goal, is actually renewable energy deployment. If you look at the most recent IPCC articles, we're behind and we're getting further behind. And so we have to be cautious. The more things that delay that deployment, the more impact it has on climate change, which impacts soil and agriculture as much as anything, including in our own Douglas County plan that we talk about.
If I may add a comment to that the efficiency lens of systems and just get to it as fast as we can is what got us into this trouble in the first place. We need to take it as a diversity lens to our systems to provide for us as many functions as possible so that we can meet our needs into a challenging future. Now, I'm not arguing or trying to stop solar energy whatsoever from the Sustainability Office, but eliminating our asset of agricultural land function for decades quickly might not be the most resilient approach for our community.
I missed the first part of that. You said there's something that we did. I couldn't hear the first part. I'm sorry.
Just taking an efficiency approach to a system that it's going to provide this one function for a certain amount of time, and we're not going to look at the diverse approaches we can take. And I understand what you're saying about layering.
Diverse on energy, or is that what you're saying?
What's that?
Did you say diverse, look at diverse things on what, energy or on something else?
On a systems thinking lens,
Oh,
just
okay.
any approach to problem solving.
Mhm.
We need to look with a diverse lens today and into the future.
Well,
Thinking
this
about
comes from
one narrow function for our systems. When that breaks, what's our backup plan?
and this comes not from me, this comes from the intergovernmental report, which the United States is part of, that actually looks at agricultural systems as well as all the other systems, and the impact to agriculture is, I mean, and look at our own report that we state. So if climate change happens, it's much bigger impact to agricultural lands than if we don't do it. So I mean, that's not me. That's actually all the studies. pretty clear.
So this is Commissioner Reed here. Mr. Anderson, I appreciate those comments, and I think there are certainly some technical challenges in front of us. That seems pretty obvious to me. Technical and legal and taxation issues for us to really wrap our brain around as we move forward with this phase. But Kim, I really appreciate your point and believe that it is our duty and responsibility through our climate action plan and through all of the other community goals and values that we discussed here tonight, and have spent a lot of time developing in our community, that we have to layer the benefits wherever possible. We have to maximize benefits for the use of our land. We have to, and that requires not ignoring the potential risks or harms that can be outcomes of a singularly focused use. So I'm really interested in figuring out how we move this forward, and excited about the idea that we have an opportunity here with all of the players that we have at this table, with all of the expertise and momentum that we have as a community resource, which is really exciting to me and makes me even more proud of this community. And I think that we gotta keep the foot on the gas with that. I do not want us to just pump the brakes because there's not a fully cooked idea, if you will. To me, it sounds like there's quite a few examples of the use. We have some adaptation challenges around utility scale and the competitiveness of that market that you're discussing, Mr. Anderson. We have some legality issues around around additional leases or multiple leases for landowners. There are some definite technical challenges I see here, but in terms of community values and the policies that we make to drive that forward, I would like us to do our best to figure out how to crack those nuts, if you will, and figure out how to create pilots that really are scalable and workable, and not spend too much time spinning our wheels about how to do that, but to actually start practicing it. And so I'm interested in us figuring out how we do that with policy, in addition to the practice that I believe is already happening. I mean, conversations have been happening in our community since last year about this. The momentum of those conversations is growing. As somebody who's been nerding out on all kinds of stuff online, you know, there's more and more videos and more articles and information and research studies about it. So it is a actively practiced industry. And I think our community can and should figure out how to incorporate it into what we will do as our role to contribute to the urgency of climate mitigation with having solar here, because we know we are one of the states that has the prime location for that. And but we've got to do it smart. We cannot just automatically flip the switch to different energy use without assessing for the potential harms and unintended consequences of that. I really appreciate everybody that came here today. I know it is a time commitment. I know we kind of threw it on you just a few weeks ago. So I appreciate all the organization for that. Byron, thank you for joining us from a state next door. I appreciate you making time. And I see that we're about 5 minutes past 5, so I want to give us a recess, but I just want to give maybe 5 minutes or so if anybody has closing remarks or any additional questions from commissioners or comments from staff.
Would you mind if I echoed what Kim said earlier on sustainability of the land? I like to come at it from the lens of land stewardship. You have a lot of land, you want to conserve it the best you can. Solar is one use of it, and you can have multiple uses for the land beneath it. Folks like to talk one thing or the other about what we do at Jack Solar Garden. We are connected to the utility. We have we have agreements with utility flow straight in. We've had tractors within our field. I get within 2 inches of our posts. I've done all the different paperwork needed to have leases with people. I've done the paperwork for getting all the legality of having folks within our solar array. It's possible. I'm one guy. I'm not a massive company doing all these things yet. I've been able to do this out on my land. So having those challenges and stating those challenges is fine, but it's definitely surmountable, especially if one guy in Colorado can do it.
Thanks, Byron. I appreciate that. Looking at our Zoom screen, I noticed that Daniel Finnegan is also with us. I believe I heard that you're with Solar Shepherd. Is that right? If you'd like to add
Yes.
anything, please do.
Yes, yes. I'm the treasurer of the American Solar Grazing Association, but I also operate a solar grazing business called the Solar Shepherd LLC, and we're based in southeastern Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we're grazing from one end of the state to the other, and all of Rhode Island, lots of different land types, soil types. But we are operating at a smaller scale than I think you're looking at here. Our average array that we're grazing is about 20 acres. Solar Shepherd operates very much like a landscaping firm. We have the same contracts, the same kinds of insurance, and some of our customers give us the option, you can graze or you can mow. We don't mow, we only graze. But we operate just like a landscaper. So if you've hired a landscaper in the past with a contract to mow a number of times per year, we are set up to graze an array for a season, manage that vegetation. There's standards set there, and we provide the same liability insurance and motor vehicle insurance and licensing that a landscaping firm would provide. The results are we have much more acreage to raise wholesome lamb and quality wool that we sell direct to consumers here in Massachusetts. So the land scale is very different here. We have 10 acres between two properties. That's our base farm. You can't produce a lot of sheep, you can't produce a lot of wool. So without our partnership with the solar industry, where we come in structured like a landscaping firm, but we come with our sheep and we graze, that's how we're able to produce a sustainable lamb business here in southeastern Mass. So it's just one other option, one other way of considering it. Thanks for your time. I encourage you with your ordinances here. I think you're on a great track.
Thank you. I always appreciate a good affirmation. I appreciate your time, and that comment will stick with me to think that of the structure and the same type of kind of vendor to vendor relationship. So thanks for being here. Commissioners, do either of you have any further questions or comments? Okay. Last chance for any staff or panelist comments. Go right ahead.
All right, and really quickly, we opened up some of our best agricultural land in the county for this use against prior protections. Asking to consider an agricultural use on that agricultural land is not a big ask. There are flexible ways, they'll just have to figure out how. We've offered a great many pieces to help with that. So I would caution as we hear about that. A lease to mow is the same as a lease to graze. That is a legality that is easily accomplished, and there's help for that. At the American Solar Grazing Association, they have the leases online. So I think those are all surmountable issues. As far as taxation goes, Mr. Miles, our appraiser, will have a lot more to say about that than I do, but the difference between a commercial use and an agricultural use is the main difference in taxation, and keeping an agricultural use on the land, and agriculture is always a business, is not anything out of line. So those are my comments.
I'm just going to add one little thing is that what's unique about Douglas County is that we actually have a scaling lamb business here, which is different than anywhere else in the country. You know, if you can imagine, it's a niche market, the lamb world is. And so there aren't very many independently owned lamb businesses. And so we do have the capability of scaling into these partnerships. And we really look forward to being able to provide some services and working with other farmers that are new beginning and underrepresented like myself and others to bring this new industry here to Douglas County. So.
Great. Thank you again, everybody, for your time. this is the most exciting conversation I've been a part of in a long time. So I've been looking forward to today, and you've given us a lot to chew on, and I look forward to how we move forward. So thanks, everybody. We'll be adjourned until 5:30.